Last night. Somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, your eyes opened, your mind surfaced, and for a few minutes, or maybe longer, you lay there in the dark, awake. Not fully, not sharply. Something softer than that. A strange, warm clarity, like the surface of a lake before dawn. And then the anxiety hit. Why am I awake? What's wrong with me? How many hours until the alarm? You checked your phone. The light burned your eyes. You did the math. You told yourself to fall back asleep. You couldn't. Not right away. And when you finally did, the alarm went off, and the day started already broken. Here is the thing nobody told you. That waking wasn't a malfunction. It was your body remembering something your culture spent 140 years teaching you to forget. Before roughly 1880, humans did not sleep the way you sleep. Not in Europe, not in Asia, not in Africa, not anywhere that has been studied with any seriousness. The idea that a person should lie down once, fall asleep quickly, remain unconscious for 7 or 8 continuous hours, and then rise with an alarm, this idea is not ancient. It is not natural. It is not biological. It is industrial. And the story of how it was imposed on the human species is one of the strangest and least examined transitions in modern history. The deeper I went into that story, the more I realized it wasn't about sleep at all. It was about what happens in the dark when no one is watching, and why that had to stop. Start with what we've lost. Because what we've lost has a name, and once you know it, you hear it everywhere in the historical record, hiding in plain sight. First sleep. Second sleep. 2 words that appear in more than 500 documents spanning from Homer's Odyssey in the 8th century BC to medical texts, court depositions, diaries, novels, and prayer manuals across every century of recorded Western history. First sleep and second sleep. 2 phases of rest, separated by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night that was so universal, so unremarkable, so woven into the fabric of daily life that writers mentioned it the way you'd mention breakfast, without explanation, without context, because everyone knew what it meant. A historian named Roger E. Kirch at Virginia Tech spent 16 years pulling this thread. 16 years in archives across Europe and North America, sifting through legal records, personal letters, literature, and medical writings before he published his findings. What he uncovered was not a curiosity. It was a civilizational pattern. For as far back as documents exist, people went to bed shortly after dark, slept for roughly 4 hours, woke naturally around midnight, spent 1 to 2 hours in a state of quiet wakefulness, and then drifted into a second sleep that lasted until morning. The period between the 2 sleeps was not empty. It was not restless. It was not insomnia. It was, by every account that survives, something closer to the opposite. People described it as a time of unusual calm. They prayed. They reflected on their dreams, which were reported as extraordinarily vivid at that hour, more vivid than dreams recalled in the morning. They talked quietly with the person beside them. They made love. A 16th century French physician noted that laborers were more fertile because they engaged in intercourse after the first sleep, when they had recovered from the day's exhaustion and had more enjoyment. Scholars and poets wrote during the interval. Others simply lay in the dark and thought. I want to pause here and ask something that isn't usually asked. What does it feel like to lie awake in perfect darkness with no anxiety about the fact that you're awake? Not checking a clock, not calculating how much sleep you're losing, not treating your own consciousness as a problem to be solved. Just awake, in the dark, with nothing to do and nowhere to be and no machine that will scream at you in 4 hours. I'm not making a mystical claim. I'm asking a practical question. What state of mind does that produce? Because we have an answer. And the answer is neurochemical. In the early 1990s, a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health designed an experiment that would change everything we thought we knew about human sleep. He took a group of healthy volunteers and removed every source of artificial light from their environment. For 1 month, the subjects lived on a schedule of 10 hours of light and 14 hours of darkness each day, roughly approximating the natural light cycle of a winter night in the pre-industrial world. The first few weeks, the subjects slept enormously, 11 hours a night, as if their bodies were repaying a debt they didn't know they carried. And then, by the 4th week, something happened that Ware did not expect. The subjects began sleeping in 2 distinct phases, 4 hours of deep sleep followed by 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness, followed by 4 more hours of sleep, without instruction, without suggestion, without any knowledge of Kirch's historical research, which hadn't been published yet. Their bodies simply did it, as if the pattern had been there the whole time, suppressed but not erased, waiting in the architecture of the human nervous system for the lights to go out. But here's what stunned the researchers. During the waking interval, the subjects' brains were producing elevated levels of prolactin, a pituitary hormone associated with deep calm, with the peaceful alertness experienced during meditation, with the sensation of satisfaction after lovemaking, with the state that allows nursing mothers to sit still for long periods in quiet contentment. The subjects weren't just awake between sleeps, they were in an altered state of consciousness. Ware described it as resembling a meditative state unlike anything observed in normal waking life. Not asleep, not awake in the way we understand waking. Something else, something between. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. A historian finds 500 references to a universal sleep practice. A neuroscientist, working independently, recreates the conditions, and the practice returns spontaneously, accompanied by a neurochemical state that modern humans never experience because they never spend enough time in darkness for it to activate. This raises a simple but critical question. What did we used to know in that state that we no longer know we've forgotten? Now let's talk about what killed it, because it didn't die on its own. In 1879, Thomas Edison demonstrated the first commercially viable incandescent light bulb. Within a decade, electric lighting was transforming American and European cities. Streets that had been dark after sunset were illuminated. Factories that had closed at dusk could now operate through the night. Homes that had organized their evenings around candlelight and hearth could now extend their waking hours deep into the territory that had belonged to the first sleep. Edison himself was explicit about what he thought of sleep. He considered it a waste of time, a relic of human laziness, an inefficiency that technology would eventually eliminate. He claimed to sleep only 3 or 4 hours a night and publicly mocked anyone who needed more. He predicted that in the future, humans would not sleep at all. And while that prediction was absurd, the ideology behind it was not. It was the ideology of the Industrial Revolution distilled to its purest form. Every hour spent sleeping was an hour not spent producing. Every hour spent in darkness was an hour not spent consuming. The midnight waking, that prolactin-soaked interval of reflection and creativity and prayer, was an hour that belonged to no employer, no market, no institution. It was private in a way that the industrial economy could not tolerate, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Because look at the timeline. Gas streetlights had already begun eroding the darkness in European cities from the early 1800s. The whaling industry, driven in large part by demand for lamp oil, had accelerated the availability of artificial light throughout the 18th century. But electric light was different. Electric light didn't flicker. It didn't run out. It didn't require maintenance. It filled a room with a constancy that obliterated the rhythms of flame and shadow that had governed human evenings for millennia. And with that constancy came a new possibility. The entire night could be colonized. The deeper I went into the records, the more I found the transition documented in real time. References to first sleep and second sleep, which had been ubiquitous for centuries, begin to thin in the late 1800s. By the early 1900s, they have almost entirely disappeared. Medical literature that had treated the midnight waking as normal began reframing it as a symptom, a disorder, something to be treated. By the mid-20th century, the concept of segmented sleep had been so thoroughly erased from cultural memory that when Kirch published his research, most sleep scientists had never heard of it. A practice that had been universal for as long as humans had been human had been deleted from the record in less than a century. The silence was deafening. Count the consequences. Because the consequences are happening inside your body right now. The most common form of insomnia in the industrialized world is middle-of-the-night insomnia. Millions of people wake in the small hours, lie in the dark in escalating panic, and either medicate themselves back to sleep or suffer through the next day in a fog of exhaustion. This is the single most frequently reported sleep complaint in modern medicine, and the treatment is almost always pharmaceutical, sedatives, hypnotics, drugs that push the brain back under the surface and keep it there. But what if it isn't a disorder? What if the people waking at 2 in the morning are not broken? What if their bodies are doing exactly what human bodies have always done, surfacing between sleeps the way they did for thousands of years, reaching for that interval of calm wakefulness, that prolactin state, that meditative space between consciousness and dream, and finding instead a glowing phone, a ticking clock, and the crushing knowledge that the alarm goes off at 6 and they are failing at sleep? Beer himself wrote that when modern humans find their sleep interrupted by periods of wakefulness, they regard it as disordered. He suggested an alternative explanation, that a natural pattern of human sleep is breaking through into an artificial world in which it seems unfamiliar and unwelcome. The evidence suggests something much larger than a scheduling inconvenience. Because consider what was available in that interval, not just rest, not just reflection. Access to a neurochemical state that the modern brain never enters. Prolactin at levels associated with deep calm and heightened creativity. Cortisol at low ebb. Dreams still vivid enough to be examined and interpreted before the conscious mind fully reassembled its filters. This was the hour when poets wrote, when prayers felt answered, when the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious was thinnest, when the mind could wander without purpose and without judgment into territory that daylight cognition could never reach, and it was replaced by consolidated sleep. 7 hours of unconsciousness compressed into a single block, bookended by electric light on one side and an alarm clock on the other. A system designed not for the human body, but for the factory shift, for the office schedule, for a world that needed workers to be unconscious for a predictable period and then fully operational the moment the whistle blew. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every domain I've examined in this research. Systems that synchronized human beings with natural rhythms, with the body, with the dark, with the cycles of light and rest that the species evolved inside of, replaced by systems that synchronized human beings with institutions instead. The calendar replaced the moon, the clock replaced the sun, and consolidated sleep replaced the ancient rhythm that had given every human being, every night, access to a state of consciousness that we now treat as a medical problem. I don't have a complete theory. I have a question that gets louder the deeper I look. Why did a practice documented across every continent, confirmed in the laboratory, embedded in the neurochemistry of the human brain, present in literature from Homer to Dickens, get erased from cultural memory in a single century? Why did the most intimate rhythm of human biology, the way we experience the night, get restructured to serve the needs of an economy rather than the needs of a body? Why does no one ask why we sleep the way we do, as if this way is the only way there ever was? I'll leave you with this. Tonight, or some night soon, you will wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. Your eyes will open. The dark will be there. And for a moment, before the anxiety arrives, before you reach for the phone, before you calculate the hours remaining, there will be something else, something quiet, something your body knows, even if your mind has forgotten. A calmness that seems to come from nowhere, a stillness that doesn't match the panic you've been taught to feel. That's the interval. That's the space between the first sleep and the second. That's the door your ancestors walked through every night for 10,000 years, into a room where the mind was quiet and the hormones were soft, and the dark was not an enemy, but a country you lived in for an hour or two before the second sleep carried you to morning. The door is still there. Your body still opens it. You've just been taught to be afraid of the room on the other side,